Thought maybe you boys might be interested in putting on a big-time wrestling bout. You know, make a nice hunk of dough for yourself.
It's time to play rollerball!
Santa?
Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus.
Morgan, you're out of here. You don't have the right temperament for the trade.
You're a dead man. What am I supposed to do?
There's always barber college.
Frankie, I know you're a great wrestler, but my brother, who ain't as handsome as you, is as strong as Charles Atlas.
Yeah, but I've wrestled women that are bigger than him.
Sure, you got fat, sloppy women.
Hello and welcome to Camel Clutch Cinema, the podcast where we talk about movies that star wrestlers or have wrestling in them. I'm Guy Hutchinson.
And I'm Craig Cohen. On this episode, we are talking about Ready to Rumble, and I cannot tell you how ready to rumble I really am. Goodness, we are talking about a WCW movie, and I cannot wait. And before we get started, be forewarned that this discussion will be chock full of spoilers.
Yes, indeed. I'm excited to talk about this one. You and I saw this in the theaters when this was brand new, and I remember we couldn't wait. It was like we heard about this, and we were like, oh, this is a train wreck we need to be standing by to watch. And we went to the theater, and it was just us, and I think there was like a guy sleeping in the back of the theater, and then like an employee and his girlfriend that showed up for a few minutes and then left.
Yeah. This was, I mean, we'll get to the release date, but this was pretty much after WCW had run its course.
Yeah, this was strange. You told me a week or two ago, you said, you know, I just watched Ready to Rumble with my brother, and I said, oh my God, we got to do that movie. This is a movie we thought about when we did The Marine for the first episode of this show. We thought about doing this movie, and we're like, this movie is too damn crazy to kick things off with. This will scare people away. People that haven't seen this movie will just not believe us. They'll be like, oh, that's those guys that make up movies, because there's no way a movie could exist anything like this.
Yeah.
The title of this movie, Ready to Rumble, is based on the Michael Buffer, you know, let's get ready to rumble, which by the way, I think now that we've said that, we have to pay him.
Yeah, I think pretty much that's going to eat up our costs for the year.
But I guess that's not a universal phrase. That's not something known around the world, because if you go to the Wikipedia page, it says Ready to Rumble, and then it says known in Japan as Headlock Go Go American Wrestling, and in Japan on video as Headlock Go Go Professional Wrestling. Which I don't know. I guess in the theaters, you know, there weren't enough people going to see Headlock Go Go American Wrestling, so they were like, maybe we should specify that it's professional wrestling, because maybe there were people that were like, American wrestling, it's not sumo, you know, and they want to say in Japan, what they seem to call wrestling a lot, which is very odd. They use the phrase Budokan a lot for wrestling, which is an arena. It's a very famous arena in Japan. And the arena is so closely associated with wrestling that they tend to use that as a term for wrestling. I don't know beyond that what their term for wrestling is, but I guess Headlock Go Go American Wrestling it is.
I would love to print out an alternate DVD cover with that poster.
I don't know. I can tell you, if I had not seen this movie when it came out, and I had a choice between watching a movie called Ready to Rumble and one called Headlock Go Go American Wrestling, I could tell you, I'd be Headlock and Go Go for American Wrestling, baby.
Yeah, and actually it's funny because I think, I haven't looked at the movie poster in a while, but it's Arquette and Khan in a headlock, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think the person that made up the foreign title actually watched the movie. I think
they just looked at the cover.
Yes, indeed.
Or the poster.
So I remember seeing this in theaters. I remember we both really liked it. We liked Frank Zappa's son's appearance a whole lot. We loved all the wrestling cameos that happened throughout. What was your general feeling watching it again recently?
I think it was clouded in so much nostalgia just for WCW in general. It's still a very, very fun movie to watch, and it was great watching it again.
Yeah. Now I'm going to bring an interesting perspective to this. My mother-in-law loves comedy. She loves comedy movies. Generally, if it's a really silly movie like this is, she's in for it. And she wanted to watch something, and I said, "Oh, I've got to watch this wrestling movie." But it's a really silly comedy. I think you'll like it. It's got James Caan's son in it. And so my wife and my mother-in-law and I watched this. And I got to tell you, my mother-in-law, she doesn't know John Cena, from John Ritter, but she loved this movie. She thought this movie was absolutely hysterical.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you want a dumb comedy, and this is a dumb comedy. This is right there for you. I think this is a fun movie. Why don't you tell us the plot?
All right. With their brains in a hammerlock and their hope high, slacker doofus wrestling fanatics David Arquette and Scott Kahn set out to help their favorite Monday Nitro hero regain the championship.
It's really not fair that you always have to get stuck with the plot summaries where they're always so poorly written. I assume that means hopes high, but it does say hope high.
Yes.
Which I think that's actually, I think that's where Obama went to high school, right? Didn't he go?
Yes.
He went to Hope High and then Change University.
Yes, Change University, yeah.
This was released April 5th in 2000, which was, I think people our age mark our lifetime to a degree between things that happened before September 11th and things that happened after. And this movie even has a shot of the Twin Towers in it. And so this was a pre-9/11 film.
Yeah.
Made $12 million at the box office and $58,000 foreign. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was funny. I was actually looking at some box office today, and it seems if movies are very, very specific to America, they're not going to do well overseas.
Wow. Headlock Go-Go American Wrestling made enough money to buy a nice condo. It was not really raking them in. No wonder they renamed it when they put it on home video. It had a budget of $24 million, which is a very low budget. That's while that sounds very high to a layman, that for a movie is very low.
Oh, yeah.
And it was Box Office Mojo says it's number 48 on the list of sports comedies. So if a movie is considered a sports comedy, they automatically put it in there. And so that means, movies like Major League and, other sports comedies, 48's not terrible of all time.
No, it's top 50. That's commendable.
Yeah. Now, why don't you read some of the other films that made the top 10 of that list?
Yeah, and there's actually quite a few wrestlers that are in some of these movies. We've got The Waterboy, which is Big Show in that?
Oh, yeah, Big Show's got a cameo in that as Captain Insano.
Yes. And then The Longest Yard, which I think Stone Cold was in.
Yeah, Stone Cold's in that, and I believe the Great Khali is
yes.
also in The Longest Yard.
Talladega Nights, Blades of Glory, Dodgeball, Nacho Libre.
Oh, my God, the greatest luchador film ever made in America.
Yeah, that's another one that I know we're going to talk about on this show eventually.
I will spoil that review. I would never tap out to that film. I've probably seen that film more times than just about any other film we'll ever talk about.
Yeah, and we've got a lot to talk about with that movie because I know that that you own a piece of it.
Yes, I do. So let's not spoil that. We do need to talk about that. 2013 will be the Nacho Libre year. What else is on this list here, Craig?
White Man Can't Jump, Cool Runnings, Bring It On, and The Benchwarmers.
Oh, wow. The Benchwarmers. John Heder, who appeared on Monday Night Raw a couple times. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
This movie's got a director who's got such an interesting past. Brian Robbins, he was on Head of the Class.
Yeah.
And
Which
then,
is funny because it's funny because most people would say, oh yeah, that's what he's known for, and now he's gone on to have this, behind the scenes career that I think overshadows his acting career.
It definitely does, and he's done a lot of films that are noted and well respected. This is not one of them, but he has done quite a few. Also interesting, he has the same birthday as me, but he was born several years earlier. He's born November 22nd, but he was born 1963. So he was born the day that John F. Kennedy was shot. So that is our second tragedy that I've mentioned during this broadcast.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy about this? I know we've probably talked about this offline, but me and you were both born on the date that a president was assassinated.
Ooh, who is the president that was born on the date of your birth? And tell us the date as well.
Well, April 14th, President Lincoln was shot. Mm-hmm. He didn't die till the 15th, but I still say that, since he was shot on the 14th, that's when the assassination happened.
I think you could go either way, but I think if I had to choose, I'd go with your answer on that. Cause I mean, he was assassinated on that day, if he hung on for a month, it's going to be a month later? Come on.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, there's always the connection that people make between those two assassinations. They say, oh, Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln, and Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, and Kennedy had a driver named Lincoln, and Lincoln had no car. I mean, they always try to do that, with those two.
No car and no mustache.
Yes, he had no mustache, but he loved rocking that beard.
I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I did not understand how Lincoln was able to keep that beard on without the mustache to hold it in place. And I can't tell you when I outgrew that. It might have been when I started shaving.
All right, this film, written by Stephen Brill, who's done other films that fit right in on this, The Mighty Ducks and Little Nicky and other films, seems like the right guy to go for this. I think this was a deal where they said, hey, you know what? We can make a movie with WCW. They're willing to do it. Let's get somebody that's the right fit to write that, somebody that's the right fit to direct it. I kind of get the feeling that everybody involved in this project, with the exception of David Arquette, was in it just to kind of put this together as a quick job to move on to their next job. I don't feel like there was a whole lot of love necessarily, but it's just that these people were guys that could do this well.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
David Arquette, on the other hand, my goodness gracious.
Yeah, he's had quite a history with professional wrestling.
All right, let's try to run through his career in wrestling. April 12, 2000, he appears on an episode of Thunder. He's worked into a bit with Eric Bischoff and the New Blood stable. And so then he gets in an alliance with Chris Kanyon, who's in the film as the body double for a character he should never be body doubling for.
Yes, Jimmy King.
And there was a whole storyline where Diamond Dallas Page was on his side, which is interesting, and he got the title. I mean, all of this stuff just blows my mind in retrospect. Arquette said he didn't think it was a good idea.
Yeah.
Didn't think this was the smartest way to go.
I mean, he was WCW heavyweight champion.
Yeah,
that is a belt that when you watch SmackDown and Big Show comes out with that belt,
right.
That is a belt, that is a title that was held by David Arquette for over a month.
Yeah, and it was always like he never beat anybody. It was always he lucked into winning.
For it.
Right, but he never physically, got in the ring, did a bunch of suplexes and beat somebody. It was always, some gimmick where he got lucky, he did
I was going
to say he did the worm.
Yeah, and he did beat Tank Abbott once.
Well, yeah. No, but Tank Abbott's career as a wrestler, not exactly the highest point of his life. But it wasn't like they booked him like Cena, where it was like all of a sudden he would hulk up and then you can't see me and win the match.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't even come out in proper wrestling gear.
Yeah, he didn't, and nor should he have. If he was seen without his shirt, I'm sure it would have ruined his acting career. He also did a vignette when he was filming 3,000 Miles to Graceland, another film that you and I both really enjoy, where he and his wife Courtney Cox are there with Kurt Russell, and they're talking about how he's WCW champion, and Kurt Russell laughs at him and walks off. It was, like a whole bit, and then Arquette comes after him with a steel chair, and so there was a lot of, playing up this. I guess they felt this was a Hollywood star that they could latch on and get whatever mileage they could out of him.
Oh yeah, and Arquette at this time was probably at the peak of his career, if you think about it. I mean, he was coming off the Scream films in the late 90s, and he was top-lining movies. He had a lot of comedies out. He had, C-Spot Run?
Right.
So, I mean, this wasn't a guy that was, way past his earning potential.
Yeah, I think this was towards the end of his highest point, but this was still his highest point of his career.
Yeah.
So he eventually lost the title. After that, he he said that, and by the way, before I get past that, he donated the money he made to the families of Owen Hart and Brian Pillman, as well as Darren Drozdoff, who, was paralyzed. Wonderful guy, Darren Drozdoff, by the way. I've met him twice, once before he was paralyzed and once after, and he was a class act and the nicest, sunniest disposition on a guy you wouldn't expect to get that from. Both times, but he donated his money to them. This was a publicity stunt for him, but not a money grab.
That is so great. I mean, that was something I did not know until just now, and that is really, really cool.
Since then, he's done a couple interesting WWE appearances. He showed up in the crowd of SmackDown once and held up a sign that said former WCW champ. And then he appeared as one of the presenters on the Slammies one year, I think 2010, and he played up himself as a heel.
Was that the year too where his voice was completely shot?
Yeah, so he's all raspy.
Yeah,
like blown out his voice.
Yeah, he was getting some great heat that night, though. He was really healing it up.
Oh, he's great. And he did wrestle again, and they kept saying, I think they pitched it as, we're going to see a former WCW champion in the main event, and it turns out to be David Arquette. So really cool guy. He's done some of the Be a Star campaign stuff for WWE. And really funny guy. He's had his ups and downs in his career and his life, but I'm a fan.
Oh, me too.
So this movie starts out, he's a sewage worker with Scott Kahn, and the characters are Gordy and Sean. And they love WCW, and they love the champ, Jimmy King.
Played by Oliver Platt.
Which is so wrong. And I think that's one of the things I like about this movie.
Yeah.
It's very much like Nacho Libre. It's a guy who would never, ever, ever wrestle.
Yeah, it almost seems like they sort of threw back to the late 70s to mid 80s period where you could really get in the ring in any kind of shape, in any kind of condition, with any kind of body type. It didn't matter how, what you looked like.
I think it's not, I think you're right on all of those except for condition. I think it was any kind of shape. I think those guys, as much as, guys like Joe LeDuc looked like they never hit the gym, and they probably didn't, I think they probably had to have some cardio to do those matches. But my goodness, it was a time of beer-bellied guys who would hang out over their trunks and bill themselves as weighing less than they did, rather than in the 80s when it went the other way and they all said, no, I'm 300 pounds when they were 220.
Yeah. In all fairness, though, Oliver Platt, and this is not an insult, he's a fine actor, but he looks a little soft.
No, yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. He looks very soft. DDP's the bad guy in this, and he's DDP in this movie, and amusingly, he was the friend of David Arquette in the ring, for whatever reason. DDP does pretty well in this movie, though, I thought.
Oh, I agree. And I think if you really look back at WCW in the late 90s, Diamond Dallas Page is really one of their big guys. I mean, if you discount Hall and Nash and Hogan and all that, Diamond Dallas Page, to me, really defines what WCW was in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he was a WCW original, too. I mean, there's not a lot of guys you can say. You can say that about Goldberg. You can say that about a few others. But he was a guy that they created. They didn't borrow him.
Didn't Diamond Dallas Page appear at a WrestleMania prior to becoming a wrestler, though?
Yeah, he drove Honky Tonk Man's car. He owned a pink Cadillac, and he drove it for the Honky Tonk Man. And remember when Greg Valentine had the black hair?
Yes.
So he was with Honky Tonk Man, and DDP was driving him. That was his car. He was.
Oh, wow.
He owned a pink Cadillac. He doesn't own it anymore. He said he had to get rid of it. It was just he was sinking too much money into his pink Cadillac.
Sure, but you could see him clear as day on that pay-per-view.
Oh yeah, you watch that pay-per-view. It's definitely DDP. It's a convertible. It's pretty easy to see the driver, and he looks just like DDP.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, one thing about him is he started wrestling later in life. I mean, for wrestlers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is interesting. Yeah. I always like that. Sheamus is another guy that's done that, where Sheamus didn't actually necessarily start late, but he became a star late. He had been a wrestling trainer he had gone through where he had stopped really wrestling and said, I'm gonna train guys to wrestle, and then, decided to try for it and made it. And I always think that's interesting. I like this opening scene. I like the big car crash. I like them in the sewage truck crying, but pretending they're not crying. I think that's all very fun.
Well, this is after World Heavyweight Champion Jimmy King gets cheated out of the title by DDP and corrupt WCW promoter Titus Sinclair.
Right. And
a whole bunch of DDP's goons.
Yes, exactly. Which are these all guys, wrestlers.
Oh, yeah. You could argue that Arquette and Khan, their characters are, for lack of a better word, they're marks, but in the sense that in this world, this movie kind of goes back and forth with whether wrestling's real or not.
Right, very much so, yes. There is, there's stuff where Jimmy King is poor and he's not multi-millionaire as he would be presented on television, but there's lots of stuff about how it's all real, but then it's not real. I mean, it's interesting how it's played in the film. There's a scene I want to talk about, which I really like, which is the scene with Frank Zappa's son. Is it Ahmet?
Ahmet, yes.
Ahmet Zappa. I love these sequences, all of the sequences at the convenience store. I think that they're fantastic.
Yes. Ahmet pretty much plays the stereotypical wrestling is fake type of person a lot of wrestling fans might encounter in their day-to-day travels.
Yes, and there's the great scene where he sticks
let me guess. It involves the slushie.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
He sticks his hand in his crack, and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm putting my hand in my crack, right? He's like...
Arquette, yes.
And then he puts his hand, up by the straw, and he's like, smell it, something's wrong with this slushie. And so that's how he gets the free refill.
Yes. And Ahmet keeps smelling it.
Yeah, it's so great. And he's like, how did you drink it? He's like, it was really tough, especially at the end, but I'll need a refill. Something was wrong with this slushie. So the basics.
They're actually, they're like the Jay and Bob of this movie in the sense that they seem to hang out in front of this convenience store.
Right. I love these two characters. I could watch Gordy and Sean in 5 other stories. I would love to see one where, they're really into, maybe football, maybe they're really into politics, and another one, maybe they get a job at a theme park. I mean, I could watch these guys in many situations.
Yeah, too bad this didn't go down the road of like those Ice Cube movies, Are We There Yet movies.
Oh yeah. It could have done that, or it could have been like Harold and Kumar. Why didn't this take off? It could have been something. We get some interesting characters when he goes to the trailer to find Jimmy King. We get to see Carolyn Ray, who's a very famous actress, and they have trouble finding Jimmy King. Later they find him. He's at this trailer. He's a mess. I mean, he's a complete waste. And I did kind of feel Jimmy King was a parody of Jerry Lawler.
It definitely seemed like that. I mean, he was Southern. He was called the King.
Right. There was a lot about it that I didn't know whether it was a mean parody, an homage, or just hey, this is a character a lot of people can relate to. Let's, kind of do it. Mm-hmm. So we get to see the stuff where Gordy's at home and he doesn't want to be a policeman, but his family, they're all policemen.
Yes, and they're all like wearing that typical highway patrol type of uniform with the mirrored sunglasses and,
right. Including mom and sister.
Yes.
Really, really classic.
The dad reminded me of the father, in terms of the way he was written and the way he acted, of the dad from the Bill and Ted movies.
Oh, yeah. You know what? So much so. The dad from Bill and Ted, where, he works at the police station and then eventually, that pays into the end with the hiding of the keys and everything. That's so true. I had not put that together, but I totally see it.
It's like they used the template for that guy.
Yeah. So, tell me about these Nitro Girls. We get a fake Nitro Girl played by Rose McGowan, and tell me about some of the real ones that we see.
All right, well, the Nitro Girls were like the Fly Girls of Nitro. They made their debut.
That is the worst thing to say because you went more obscure. You took something obscure and you made it more obscure.
Yes, So the Fly Girls were like the solid gold dancers.
All right, maybe that's a little
in living
better.
color.
All right, although now you're only appealing to very old people in the audience. But all right, we'll take it. So those are the Nitro Girls. Tell me about how they came to be and what they were.
Well, they made their debut on July 14th, 1997 on an episode of Nitro. And they were formed by Kimberly Page, who was Diamond Dallas Page's wife, at the request of Eric Bischoff. Their main focus was to entertain the live fans during the commercials during Monday Nitro. They also regularly performed in short segments on the show. They even had their own pay-per-view dubbed the Nitro Girls Swimsuit Calendar Special, which aired on August 3rd, 1999, and it was later released on home video. They did spawn some pretty big talent. In late 99, the group held a competition to find a new member, and in November, Stacy Keibler defeated 300 other girls for a spot on the dance troupe and $10,000. Her winning routine was watched by 4.4 million viewers. And Stacy Keibler, as we know, went on to a WWE career, and has since been on Dancing with the Stars, and I think she was dating George Clooney for a while?
I think it might be George Clooney. Yeah, I wasn't she dating like A-Rod for a while? Wasn't she at WrestleMania with A-Rod, or was that another WWE girl? I think it was her.
I think you're right. Yeah. She's done a pretty good job of distancing herself from her past, or at least
she's done a good job at being like a Paris Hilton light kind of person, you know?
Yeah. The group became more and more involved in storylines, and then it slowly dissolved. They never officially broke up until 2001 when WCW was sold to Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation, and sadly, Vince did not decide to bring that faction back. There were two notable Nitro Girls that I haven't mentioned yet. I'm going to give you their names. Storm, do you remember Storm?
I do remember Storm, and I know who Storm went on to become. That was Booker T's wife, Charmel, who also had the whole thing with Teddy Long.
Yes, and Whisper.
All right, Whisper isn't ringing a bell, but I'm assuming you're talking about Miss HBK, right?
Yes.
Okay, I did not know her Nitro name, but she was on WWE TV in the whole Bret Hart car angle. She was the one that hit Bret Hart with the car and smashed up his leg, which he didn't really smash up. Later we found out that was a fake injury within a fake injury before WrestleMania.
And she was on TV in another segment, wasn't she? Or was it just an HBK segment?
I don't remember. I wouldn't be surprised though if she's been on, that one I remember specifically because I thought at the time, and a lot of people did, that was going to be the angle, was that it's HBK's wife that actually hit him. But it really was just, she just happened to be there that day, and they were like, hey, you're attractive, why don't you do this segment?
Yes. So, and then we have in the movie, like you said, their leader, Rose McGowan, who plays Sasha, who is pretty much, I don't want to say a useless character, but a pretty useless character in terms of where her storyline goes.
I know. I think she's only there. They probably started talking to all these girls and were like, none of them can carry the lines we need. So we have to get a real actress. And, here's a name actress we can get. Very famous at the time. I think she was dating like Marilyn Manson.
Yes.
And they said, we could throw her on camera. She can do the lines, and we'll bring in a small, but maybe, some people to the project, watching it, some audience. The Nitro Girls, their big thing was those Nitro parties. I think you and I should see if we can get them to come out, maybe and Mean Gene, and we can hold a Nitro party one night.
Yeah. Was it Mean Gene or was it Stagger Lee Marshall?
Stagger Lee. Yeah, I think it depended. How close you were to Mean Gene's house.
And didn't they I think it was tied in with one of those 1-800
collect, yes.
They would call in from the party to say what a good time they were having.
Right. Stagger Lee, I think, would do the ones on the phone, and then they'd actually send a camera crew with Mean Gene to the myth of the Nitro party, because I don't believe there was ever a Nitro party that was held in the United States that was not filmed. I think every one of them was either filmed or broadcast on Nitro in an audio form. Who does that? Who has a Nitro party? But I think we should do it. We should bring it back. I think that's what we should do. In the film at this point, they talk about the triple cage match, which eventually came to WCW. I think was a great thing that WWE ought to bring back. It was a cage with a cage on top of it with a cage on top of it. It looks awesome in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
It plays well in the film, and I think it's a really good plot within this. And I think, again, like Elimination Chamber, this, I think, would make a great pay-per-view every year.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Especially if you utilize the cages in a way where you could have different guys on different levels at some point, and then finally getting together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. At this point in the story, we get the training montage, and there's, they go to the gym, and you see Goldberg, and this is where you have the greatest cameo in this film.
Yeah, and it's amazing. This is not a cameo that viewers are going to have to strain to find. He almost looks straight at the camera, and it is one of the biggest names in WWE at the moment.
Yes. John Cena is in this movie. He's bigger, I think, than any of the wrestlers or actors in this film, and he has no lines and just kind of looks away as he's like helping Bill Goldberg bench press. He's like spotting him.
Yeah, and then he sits down at like one of those those pec fly machines, and he's seated facing the camera, so he looks directly at the camera.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it was just that he was a guy that was, an independent wrestler, I guess, that they thought, would be great in the scene because he was a bodybuilder, and he looks great in the scene, but God, it's so weird to see him in this.
Yeah, and then you get Bill Goldberg, who at the time was one of WCW's greatest guys, so, this movie, it really feels like the mad world of professional wrestling movies.
I'll take that. That is an absolute good comparison. Let's talk about Sal Bandini. This is the Martin Landau. Mm-hmm. This is interesting. I love Martin Landau. He's so well remembered for his part in Ed Wood. Which he's phenomenal in. But, I mean, this is a guy who's been doing movies since, I think, the late 60s, early 70s. I've seen him in so many different things, including, the old Mission Impossible series. Great actor. He's playing Stu Hart.
Yeah, basically. And he's playing, I think he played older than he really was here.
Yeah, he's doing one of those gimmicks where I ought to be dead. It's the I'm an old man, so therefore I'm 150. But yeah, no, he looks great. He does the part perfectly. You would think that this guy, if he's not, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel that he's an old time wrestling fan.
Oh yeah, he definitely seemed to embrace this role with way too much gusto to just be taking a paycheck.
Academy Award winner Martin Landau, and he gets attacked by Sid Vicious and Saturn, Perry Saturn.
Yes. This is an amazing sequence. So basically, Sasha's the Rose McGowan character's whole reason for being in this movie is to find out who is training Jimmy King, who for some reason needs a trainer after he was already WCW champ.
Yes. Yeah, to find somebody so he can get back on top.
Yeah. So it didn't seem like it was that hard to figure out who was training Jimmy King, but she has to date David Arquette to find out that information.
Right.
So then they send, and this is one of my favorite sequences in the movie, mainly because of the people who are involved. You've got Sid Vicious and Perry Saturn going into his house to basically take out the old man, Sal Bandini. And
let's talk about these two guys. First, you have Sid, who's the biggest goofball in the history of wrestling. This is a guy, top name WWE talent, WWF champ, at one point WCW champ.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest goof to ever hold the WWF championship.
Yeah.
David Arquette tops him on the WCW side.
You're failing to mention, though, his greatest achievement, though, of winning the Greater Regional Atlanta softball championship.
Yeah, exactly. This is a guy who would take time off from wrestling so he could go play softball. And looked like a really muscled up William Catt. And he was the ruler of the world. And he was the guy the Shockmaster came after. I mean, this was Sid. Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, just Psycho Sid, whatever you call him at the time. Anyway, you have him. Then you have Perry Saturn. And I don't like Perry Saturn for one reason. I almost cried when I thought Perry Saturn was dead because he was missing for so long. Perry Saturn disappeared.
I remember that. In this day and age, when somebody falls off the face of the earth, it's got to be considered pretty serious because it's so hard to disappear nowadays.
Yes, and I assume Perry Saturn had a Dino Bravo-like end where, he was taken out, he'd got involved with something, and he was in somebody's backyard under, 6 feet under. And then he shows up with a face tattoo.
Yes, and Perry Saturn, for those who might not remember him, he wrestled in WWF. He was one of the guys that came over with, Benoit and Malenko.
And Eddie Guerrero, the Radicals, with a Z.
Yes, and then he was basically turned into a comedy character, and he had that whole run with Al Snow with Moppy.
Yeah, he had Moppy, and he was with Terry for a while. He was great. I thought he was really good. I was a fan of Perry Saturn, and so...
And who called him Perry Satellite?
That was Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan referred to him in an interview as Perry Satellite, and I am not sure to this day whether that was a botch on Hogan's part or if Hogan was insulting him by getting his name wrong, and I don't know which it was. Let's get through the end of this movie because there's so many wrestlers in this I want to talk about. We get the big ending where finally Jimmy King's going to wrestle. There's a whole lot of connection between Gordy and Shawn and Jimmy King, and there's a convoluted match with the steel cage we've talked about.
Yes, and the stipulation being that if Jimmy King can win, he'll get $1 million, but if he loses, he has to retire.
Right.
And seems like one of those incredibly weighted stipulations.
Yes. But that was his only choice because in this movie there is no WWE for him to go to because that would have been the best movie if like halfway through Jimmy King's like, well, why don't I just go to WWE? And they just take him in and they're like, Vince is like, welcome aboard. And then the movie ends and you're only 25 minutes in. Oh, God. He's like, I'm sending you to Ohio to train with Dusty Rhodes.
And we're changing your name.
We already have a king. We see Booker T, Billy Kidman, Disco Inferno. A bunch of guys are in this ending sequence, as well as Sting, who was huge in WCW at this time.
And I got to tell you, the setup for Sting in this movie is terrible. Unless you were a WCW fan, the Joey Pants character goes to Sting who's hanging out in the bathroom or one of the locker rooms and says, "Don't you interfere tonight, Sting." And that's the first time we see Sting.
Right.
And we're supposed to know who he is. I mean, this movie for the most part has done a pretty good job of setting things up. Yeah. But they really just assumed that people were going to know who Sting was.
Yeah, my mother-in-law, no idea who Sting was. This is one of the points in the movie where they weren't setting it up for general audiences. This was very specific. They were thinking everybody in this audience was going to be a wrestling fan. You mentioned Joey Pants. He's got a great part in this. This is Joey Pantaleone. I believe this is the actual pronunciation of his full name, but everybody calls him Joey Pants. And he was on top of the world at this point.
Oh yeah, he was coming off of The Matrix. He was probably doing 8 movies a year or something during this time period. He was like the Sam Jackson of Italian actors.
Yeah, very successful actor and a very good actor and a good guy to put in this part because he probably didn't have to work that many days and he sells you on this character. I think that's one of the things about getting a really good actor for a small part is that if you get a non-memorable, not good actor, when they show up at the beginning and then appear at the end, you don't remember them. If you don't see them enough, you're like, who is that guy again? Or why am I supposed to hate that guy? Whereas if it's somebody that's this talented of an actor, they can, in a few scenes, really make you feel what they want you to feel.
Oh yeah.
We get a obviously Jimmy King wins at the end. We get the big resolution to that. And then we get this ending where they're back at the convenience store talking to kids.
Yes. After Gordy he basically saves the day by coming in a cop gimmick, borrowing from WWF where everybody's got to have a day job. He flies into the arena on a California Highway Patrol motorcycle and saves the day. And then it pretty much is set up that he is going to be Jimmy King's tag team partner.
There's a few things I want to say about this. First of all, yes, that's a great payoff to the thing where his family wants him to be a cop, so he does become a cop in a matter of speaking. Number two, DOA, shortly before this, existed in WWE. Around 97, they were formed. And they would ride down to the ring on their motorcycles. And since then, Undertaker had a gimmick, probably right around this time, where he was the American Badass and he would come down to the ring on his motorcycle. We have talked about Hulk Hogan not being able to start his motorcycle as he took it down to the ring. I gotta say, looking back at every time I've seen somebody come down with a motorcycle, you look ridiculous because you can't bring it up to any speed. So it's like you might as well be on a bike. You're slowly, or a tricycle for God's sake.
A tricycle, exactly.
You're slowly inching your way to the ring, constantly putting your feet down on the ground to steady yourself because you're going so slow.
Yeah.
But I like that. I do like that part. I like that payoff to the character because, again, you really root for these guys. I really like these two characters.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those great, feel-good endings.
It is a lot of fun. We also get the scene at the convenience store, and early in the first scene at the convenience store, there's the dream sequence with Randy Savage, right? That comes early in the film.
Yes.
And that is a great, great scene. That's probably the first time in the movie that you see Chris Kanyon as well, because every time Jimmy King takes a bump, it's immediately Kanyon, and there's a lot of times where Kanyon looks right at the camera.
Yes.
But Randy Savage is there as a cardboard cutout selling Slim Jims, and he comes to life, and then he's the villain, and Jimmy King is the hero, which is very, very cool. So at the end, we go back to the convenience store, and he's telling kids that dreams can come true, and then they get another sequence with Ahmet Zappa.
Oh yeah, and he gets beat up by Goldberg.
Right. Goldberg has to show up again to take care of business. We get a big ending where they ride off in a stretch Hummer with Sal. We get Sal Bandini again. We're happy to know he's good. He's all recovered and in a hot tub, and
he's more than good.
He's got a lot of women with him.
Yes, and the Hummer is driven by Nitro Girl Che.
Indeed. Now,
and he ends the movie by saying, a very Don King-like, God bless America.
Yes, very good point. That was Don King's catchphrase. And Don King famously, during the run where Mike Tyson was involved with WrestleMania, where it was Shawn Michaels versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Mike Tyson was the outside enforcer.
Yes.
They originally started with Don King, and Don King would come on and be like, well, the Las Vegas Boxing Commission says he can't fight, but he wants to come in the ring and fight Mike Tyson. So what are we going to do? We got big names, Mike Tyson and WWF. And he was great. He was Don King. He was just selling it so well. And at this point, Mike Tyson had a legit fight with, not a legit physical fight, but a verbal and legal fight with Don King, where I guess he, depending on who you ask, either he realized Don King was stealing his money or he decided that Don King was stealing his money. But either way, they split ways, and we didn't get any more Don King on WWE TV.
Which is a true tragedy in the broadcasting world.
I cannot tell you how much if you asked me at that time and today, I think we would have been better off if we kept Don King and let Mike Tyson go to the wave side. Because as much as Mike Tyson was great and he did that punch on Shawn Michaels and he, tore off the shirt, he did the chop. He did the chop. He did the DX chop. And then at the end, he was in favor of Stone Cold. He was no longer with DX. Don King is a master promo cutter. If there was any justice in the world, they'd bring him back sometime. He would have been a great host of Raw one night when they did the host of Raw. He would be a fantastic 80s style manager. Oh my God, that guy has wordplay to no end. And so his line, God bless America, he would always say only in America, but it's so typical of him how Sal Bandini says it at the end of this movie. Sal, based on Luthez and Stu Hart, definitely could see the Luthez in there, but really the Stu Hart, especially after watching Wrestling with Shadows, which we reviewed recently on this show, it totally feels like that.
Yeah, there's actually the introductory scene for him. He's actually stretching and working out on a bunch of high school wrestlers when they show up.
Yes, it's totally that gimmick. I mean, really is. Oliver Platt says he accidentally hit Randy Savage during this filming of the opening scene, and this is proven if you watch those bloopers that they have, because you really do see it. And Randy and Oliver Platt looks shocked and horrified that he actually hit Randy.
Yeah, and Randy was probably thinking to himself, I'm glad it was just Oliver Platt. Goodness, that might have been the worst Randy Savage ever.
It wasn't bad, actually. Chris Kanyon, God rest his soul, was his stunt double. And
I actually just looked this up. Mm-hmm. Chris Kanyon and Oliver Platt were the same exact height.
Wow, well I'm not surprised about that, but they were not they may have been the same weight, but they were not the
different
same
body
proportion.
build.
Yeah, there is a clear difference when you see Kanyon, and who better than Kanyon to stunt double him? Shane Helms did the stunt work for David Arquette.
Look out! There's a hurricane coming.
Let's talk about all of the wrestlers that we see in this movie, some longer than others. We see DDP a whole lot, which is great because he was part of the David Arquette gimmick. Yeah. We see Bill Goldberg and Sting, as we talked about. We also see Bam Bam Bigelow for a little bit.
Yeah, he's in one of the in-ring sequences where there's
the triple post. I believe it's a triple post massacre.
Yes.
Which no one can survive. And it's not even a pay-per-view. We see Randy Savage. We do see Booker T, who has gone on to become the SmackDown general manager.
Yes, and Booker T looked a lot different back then. And I got to tell you, Booker T and his brother were one of my favorite tag teams in WCW.
Harlem Heat.
Just tremendous. I mean, if you ever have time, just look those guys up. And Booker looks a lot different now than he did then, especially with the hair that he's currently sporting. But I love those guys, and there was a great match where Booker T cheated, and somebody handed him a roll of quarters, and he hits, I think it was Sting, with a roll of quarters, and the ref's counting as he's looking at all this loose change in the ring.
That is, I think that is a reference, though, to a very famous moment where Randy Savage did that to Tito Santana. And that's how Randy Savage won the title from Tito Santana, the IC title, many, many years ago. That, by the way, was a Danny Davis match. And they always used that later as part of the Danny Davis storyline. And even as a kid, I was like, well, any ref would have made that mistake.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the other guys. I didn't spot all of these guys, so let me know if you saw Juventud Guerrera.
Yes, I did, and I only took note of him because he didn't have his mask on. He did wrestle with a mask for a while, and also I could not get excited seeing him because Chris Jericho, when he came over to WWF,
yes.
One of his first encounters with The Rock.
It was his very first, yes.
And The Rock name-checked Juventud, basically saying that Chris Jericho wasn't really fit to be facing him.
He says, you think you're, all that because you wrestled some guy named Juventud? Hoovy juice, man.
Yes.
Now, Kurt Hennig I did see in this, which I was really excited to see. Another guy who's long gone at this point. But
sadly.
He was a guy that I watched that documentary on him that the WWE put out. And in that, Wade Boggs, the baseball player, talks about how he did the whole I'm Perfect segment where he was the pitcher and Mr. Perfect was just clocking home run after home run. And he said after that they became friends. And they went hunting one day. And he said that Kurt was with him, and Wade Boggs cut himself so deeply that he required all kinds of stitches and could have bled to death. And he said he couldn't walk anymore. He said he was trying to walk. They were going to, to get to safety, to get to help. And he couldn't do it. And he said Kurt picked him up and carried him the whole way. And he said the fact that he was strong enough to do that. I mean, Wade Boggs telling this story, absolutely, choked up, totally moved, saying that, this guy saved my life, and that there's no other way to look at it. I would have died if I wasn't out with him on this day.
Yeah, and I mean, Wade Boggs isn't not a
He's
small
an
guy.
athlete,
I mean,
yeah.
He was an athlete. Yeah, he was a professional major league
and
athlete.
That's it. That was his thing. He was like, you can't carry me. And Kurt was like, watch me, I'll carry you and I'll walk through the brush and carry you through. So if you get a chance to see it, I think it's called Absolutely Perfect, but it's the documentary WWE put out on him, maybe about 5 years ago at this point. It is.
And he was great.
Really, really well worth seeing. I've in my travels meeting wrestlers, I've met a few and talked to them about him. Specifically George the Animal Steel, who had so many nice things to say about him, just said he was such a wonderful man, that he was just such a nice guy.
Mm-hmm. And did you see George Steele wrestle?
I did. I saw George Steele do what you could kind of consider wrestling in the year 2010. Well past his prime, but he was still ripping turnbuckles, and he was a tag team partner in a match that he appeared in for all of about 15 seconds to a small crowd in New Jersey.
Yeah, and we already mentioned the movie earlier in this episode, but we can cover eventually
Ed Wood. Yeah, Ed Wood, absolutely. Perry Saturn we see Rey Mysterio Jr. Did you catch him?
I remember seeing him. I just can't recall where. I mean, there's a lot of
guys you see real quick, and I think he didn't have his mask on.
Yeah, this was probably definitely the point in his career where he had been unmasked.
And Prince Iaukea is in this. Van Hammer. Gorgeous George is standing alongside Randy Savage in the cutout form. And then comes to life. We also get our announcers. We get Michael Buffer doing the Ready to Rumble. We get Tony Schiavone and Mike Tenay, as well as Mean Gene in a great scene where they're backstage talking to Mean Gene. I like that scene a lot.
Yes. And then we also get referee Charles Robinson, who is still an active WWE ref, and he had that whole Little Nature Boy gimmick for a while.
He did indeed. Let's talk about the state of wrestling at the time when Ready to Rumble came out. You got your WCW World Heavyweight Champ, Sid Vicious. And on April 10th, the titles were declared vacant by Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff after they rebooted WCW. They took like a week off and did a best of, and they rebooted the franchise.
And this really shows you how far off the rails WCW was at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, they were no longer competing in the ratings with Raw, and it was really just a mess. You had Russo, who was just out of control in terms of the writing, and you had a lot of guys steering a ship that really shouldn't have been steering a ship.
That is so true. Also, the reboot itself. Anytime you're sitting there saying, the Cena, AJ, Vicky Guerrero storyline is stupid. Pop in an episode of Nitro from this era, and you'll totally say, you know what? It's not that bad. At least it's not that bad.
Yeah.
The U.S. champ was Jeff Jarrett. This was really close to the end of WCW when, they had the whole thing where Vince thought he bought Nitro. It ended up being Shane that bought them, and then they had the invasion. But Vince saw him on TV, and he's like, will I hire him? And double no, remember he was like, you're fired. He did that whole gimmick. And Jeff Jarrett, a guy who screwed Vince over with the help of Vince Russo when he worked for WWE. The story is that his contract expired and he had one match. He still had the title. And so he had to lose the title to China. And Vince Russo apparently colluded with him to make sure that it would work out so that he could lose that title when he was no longer under contract and get like $100,000 or $200,000 for one horrible, horrible match.
Yeah. And I got to say, I mean, I was a huge Jeff Jarrett fan when he first came to the WWF with that whole double J
I liked
gimmick.
it, yes.
But he was a guy that I think he was one of those guys that thought he was bigger than he should have been.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of those those B-level mid-card guys that thought he deserved to be top tier.
No, you're absolutely right. He was, and he would have been a great, there's nothing wrong with being the top mid-carder. I mean, if you hear how we talk about Curt Hennig was never world champ. Curt Hennig was a middle-of-the-card guy, who did fight Hogan a few times but never won, and was an IC champ. And God, I have nothing but great things to say about him. Sid, on the other hand, my memories aren't so positive. So there's nothing wrong with being a great mid-card guy, but a mid-card guy that bumps up to the top and doesn't belong there, sometimes, like Jeff Jarrett, it's not a good thing. WCW World Tag Team Champs were the Harris Brothers, who were also DOA in WWF. They had a handful of other monikers, and they appeared everywhere. WWF at the time, they weren't WWE yet, but they had Triple H as champ. IC champ was the horrific Chris Benoit. And then tag team champs Edge and Christian doing their 5-second poses. This was a good time for wrestling.
What a great era for WWF wrestling. I mean, this was really the birth of like the tables, ladders, and chairs matches. Just really, really high energy tag team stuff going on. And boy, I could watch any of those matches.
So let's ask. Did you tap out to Ready to Rumble, Go-Go Headlock American Wrestling?
All right, I got to say that I was a huge WCW fan in the mid to late 90s. There was probably a period where I was watching WCW on a regular basis and not watching WWF programming at all. With that said, I got to say that even with the haze of nostalgia and my love of WCW, I can't tap for this movie. It's too much fun, and as a wrestling fan, you're gonna see people It's just chock full of wrestlers, and it really treats the business in a great way, and it's just fun, it's light, and it really captures the time. And I gotta say, I would recommend watching this movie.
All right. I am going to say, very much echoing what you say, this is a fun movie. And I talked about how I watched it with a non-wrestling fan, and she liked it. It's a movie that you can watch. Whether you're a wrestling fan or not, you just have to be somebody that's a fan of really, really lowbrow entertainment. And on that level, this certainly at least gets to your expectation. It may not totally exceed it, but it's not to the point that I could ever tap out to it. So no, I do not tap out to Ready to Rumble. Well, thanks for joining me on this one, Craig. This was a real fun blast from the past.
Yes, it was.
And we will see you next time here on Camel Clutch Cinema.
So you want to wrestle, huh?
You're too little. We got ushers bigger than you. Leave. I gotta take a crap.
Don't you see? Your skills plus my skills in the ring. Tag team.
Highway Patrol's is John Triton.
What are you doing up there? Staying away from you.
No more rhymes now. I mean it.
Anybody want to feel it?
What's that smell? Down goes Jimmy King. Oh my God, a 4-post massacre. No one can survive this. This isn't even a pay-per-view.